Pack Pro. Asante sana for making time. Job Wanjoy is here, Head of Policy Research and Advocacy at the Kenya CAM, has singled out 4 proposals that should be repealed. One CAM says, for example, the Export Investment Promotion Levy 100% in cases where the cost of the raw material is equal to the proposed levy. For example, they say bar soap used by Mwananchi for washing clothing, utensils and bathing will increase from 170 to approximately 270. They also singled out the Import Declaration Fund, that's the IDF, which is increasing from 2.5% to 3%. They say that will negatively impact the cost of raw materials and intermediate products used for manufacturing value addition. Again, this will result in lowering the competitiveness of local industries in domestic and export markets due to a rise in the cost of imported inputs, raw materials and machinery, and hence favorable to imported finished goods. The proposed 25% excise duty on vegetable oils will also drive upwards the cost of cooking oil, which remains an essential commodity, ultimately increasing the cost of burden.
Work for the sector. For instance, the law being paid within 24 hours. Now it has been pushed to... you have looked at the statement that we released today, and indeed this is just part of what is percent. And that's the reason why you see the cost of cement has increased. We don't have a problem with the imposition of the duty, but if we follow what is called, don't impose on what is going to drive the industrialization in the country. And that's Responsibility Regulations 2021 that mandates every producer to belong to a producer responsibility organization, PROs.
Yeah. Environmental costs impact into their budgets. And unfortunately, this contradicts the existing position by government, which is that they need to self from a digital perspective. What does that do in terms of trying to look at tandem with another? Yeah. Then you have contradiction. Okay. And what that does is it drives the costs up significantly of billion shillings in terms of salaries and wages. What happens in the event, and I know Job can speak to this, when government had introduced a levy some time back. So at the heart of it, we need to...
You're not.
It's in this country. So you introduce, an eco levy. They sell at 230 shillings. It doesn't make sense. The same thing with the oil itself. That 3,900 in the market today is going to 6,600 when it's refined. Yeah. And they've removed that set of that net. Everything that is cooked in your household or in the workplaces or in the businesses. And people will sneak in their own amendments for one reason or the other, rent-seeking, whatever purpose. But it's really very unfortunate when you want manufacturing to grow to 30%. To 20% of the GDP. Yeah. And the economic report just released, you read it earlier on. Manufacturing is one of the sectors that has gone down in the last 1 year. Yeah. And it's partly because of the disincentives policies, that have been introduced by the government. Okay. The cost of power is too high. The cost of, infrastructure problems. Then you add on this taxation and all these burdens. So you're going to hit businesses. They're not going to expand. You cannot grow that sector by 20%. All right. Forget it. It's not going to happen anytime soon. With this kind of mentality, I think that's why I'm saying it's punitive. Yeah. This finance bill really has not been well thought out, and they need to scrap some of these things if they want to help. Because the cost of living was the main thing that we were told the government wants to address. How do you address cost of living when you want to increase the price? Mama Morgan at Tengeneza, she makes chapati on the road, on the streets. That's how people survive, on the beans. Those things, you're going to make her cost to go up by 20% because of this increase of 80% in the cost of cooking oil, and then the plastics and every other thing. By the way, I have not added the cost of the financial services. Cost of finance will be a major thing because the cost of financial services will go up. Labor, NHIF will come in on board, 2.8%, isn't it? Approximately 2.75? 2.75. The housing levy will come in. So the cost of labor will go up, everything. So all these things will drive the...
Slightly more than 500 billion in terms of what the projection is. But the question is, if you are having a projection of revenue of close to 3.9 trillion, how are you going to raise that money? And for me, that is where the challenge comes in. When you start talking about moving from 14% of revenue to GDP to about 18%, and the journey towards that realization is through additional taxes. rather than efficiency in revenue collection, looking at the areas where you can tighten the belts, especially around how we use technology to just drive our revenue collections up. So I think the focus is on the wrong area. And like they say in the Laffer curve, once you hit the peak, any additional taxes you levy then can only lead to less tax collection. And you can see by the end of March, we had collected about 1.5 trillion from a projection of 1.9 then. So it speaks to clearly that the measures we are taking are not working. But I want to look at it in the broader context. If you are looking at increasing tax collection, then you also need to look at the efficiency in terms of also how you use the resources, where we are applying our resources appropriately. And like Bill Okero said, if you are spending so much on electricity, what is the government doing towards supporting the manufacturing sector in terms of just easing the cost of doing business? You'll find that electricity would probably cost you 26 shillings per kilowatt. And if you break it down, KenGen charges probably 7 or 8 shillings. The other independent power producers charge as high as over 100 shillings. Then the consumer pays the price. So sealing such loopholes and just ensuring that there is hygiene around that space creates opportunity in the manufacturing sector. So I think we can definitely do away with some of the proposals. There are a few good ones. I want to believe not everything is bad, especially in terms of what is proposed around the pension, the provident funds, contributions that now you don't have to register with the commissioner and RBA. That is a good space for employees. Some of the gains, expanding the bands around how much you are able to charge or rather to apply as per diem. I think those are small areas you can say they are positive gains. But overall, and looking at the global economy, I think some of the proposals here are not even consistent with our tax policy, which you are trying to put in place so that those in the business space can have a predictable business environment. So those would be my comments.
Yeah, but Esbon, you talk about the Laffer curve, which is the inverted relationship between tax collection and revenue collection in the end. But the president says that we are yet to push this further to about 22%.
I think, yes, you can say that there are opportunities of raising that, but where are you getting this revenue? Even as you talk about the GDP having grown by 5.6%, if you broke it down into various sectors, which areas have been able to grow? The common man is complaining there's no money in the pocket. Yes, the economy has grown. We have borrowed from the public close to $1 trillion every year. So when you pay this interest on borrowing, you're paying it to who? Probably the owners of financial institutions. So then they may smile and say the banks are doing well, the insurance companies are doing well, but the common man. And now then the cost of transacting financial services also goes up. So for me, my thinking is that there is definitely an excess. If an economy is growing with 5.6% of an 18 or 17 trillion GDP, clearly you can have a relationship in terms of what you can collect as taxes. But then the other question is, how is our economy arranged for you to be able to collect those taxes? So sometimes it's more of the efficiency of the Kenya Revenue Authority, the measures they come up with to be able to collect these taxes, rather than barriers towards business. If you look at the amendments in terms of what we call the Tax Procedures Act, they are clearly designed to hurt the consumer and the business person rather than to support business. Is the work of rent collection, but definitely hurt the other side. So yes, we can get to that level, but not through additional taxes. We can have more hygiene around how we collect our taxes.
All right. Job, you've mentioned that the cost of manufacturing will go up generally, but where are the opportunities in terms of taxation? Because if the president targets about a 22% tax collection, an increase, what then should be done?
Yeah, you're asking about the opportunities. I think we need to do economic restructuring in terms of which are these pockets that we can be able to get revenues. And if not that, when you look at the GDP composition, it has 5 components. We have government spending, we have private sector consumption, we have investment, we have export and import. So GDP may grow because of government expenditure, but the private sector is not thriving. And the private sector is the one that creates jobs. Yeah. It's the one that brings investments. So you find when you talk about the revenue to GDP at 22%, we must look at where are these pockets that are going to drive this revenue. When we have only 5 million Kenyans, or 5.7 million Kenyans, are the one who are paying taxes today, against a population that is eligible for voting at about 22 million, that really speaks seriously of how we need to do our economic restructuring to ensure that everybody comes on board. There is employment, there's no other employment. Subsequently, you'll be able to get pay from such people. When talking about the sustainability of businesses, SME cannot see the third year because of the financial burden that they're going through, because of the regulatory overreach. You find you have 30 agencies that are crowding out on you and your business. Subsequently, if you can look at how we can increase on regulatory environment, increase on our cost of electricity, improve on our cost and tenor of capital, look at all these to ensure that the businesses are thriving. Government will be able to get direct and indirect taxes out of that. That's what can be able to drive the revenues. But again, when you look at the composition of the GDP, as I've mentioned, not necessarily the government expenditure that is going to take us there. Yeah. Let's ensure that we have conducive investment environment that has been created in the country. Let's ensure that there is private sector consumption that is happening so that we have economic ripple effect. Let's look at how we can drive more of our exports rather than importation. And subsequently, we'll have an economic structure that is supportive of GDP growth in the right way. Yeah. But on the other hand, government is not over-concentrating on 5.7 million Kenyans to pay the taxes so that we can get 22%.
And isn't that what there's a financial transactions taxation will address?
National taxation policy?
Yes, because there's the fact that only a section of people are paying taxes. There are those who are eligible to pay taxes, but they're not in the official system of KRA.
Yeah, we have, of course, those who are going to be brought on board, and that's the reason why Kenya Revenue Authority is trying to digitize the processes. Yeah. For instance, we have VAT auto-populated returns. We have the e-teams that have been introduced, but we have been complaining about the transition period. There is no sensitization that is happening. You find, like now in the finance bill, we are talking about a penalty of I think I don't know whether it's 2 million if you're not registered with
e-teams.
Yeah, 2 million if you're not registered. Yes, so it's quite punitive. So we can net more people who today are earning, but they're not paying taxes. But we must provide the right education, the right sensitization, so that we ensure that we have very many people that have been brought on board. So we have that category, but we have still another category, and you know it. Many CVs that are coming to our offices every day, or even calls that you receive every day. I want a job, support me with this every month, or something like that, because someone is not employed. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. Let's do some economic restructuring so that we have enough tax base, not concentrating on 5.7 million Kenyans to bring the 22%, yet the rest, they want an opportunity, but it's not being provided. Okay. And that's when we talk about in the principle of taxation. Equity and fairness, to ensure that everybody in the country has an opportunity to earn and to contribute back to the growth of the economy. Okay.
Joyce, what will you be recommending to the committee?
Well, ideally, of course, I definitely want to see a deletion of the eco-levy.
Complete deletion. Complete
deletion. I feel it is a total duplication of government's already existing efforts. Don't forget that the Kenya Kwanza regime, when they were coming into power, one of their commitments in their manifesto, their pledges, was really about implementing extended producer responsibility. And actually, we've been working together with the regulator, as well as, of course, the Ministry of Environment to try and ensure that extended producer responsibility is actually implemented properly. Yeah. More importantly, we are also not seeing benefits around trying to incentivize plastic recycling. For instance, we actually have seen a removal of tax exemption on plastic recycling machinery, which then it actually means that government is not actually it's contradicting itself in its own document, because on one hand you're saying we want to introduce a levy because plastic pollution is a menace, but then you're removing the exemption on plastic machinery, plastic recycling machinery, which should actually be supporting this. Again, let's not forget, what is the size of this sector that we're talking about? When we talk about the recycling, plastic recycling space, we're talking about a sector that's projected to grow in Africa to about $72 billion by 2028. And so for us as Kenya, we would be removing ourselves from the equation by disincentivizing investment in that area, because today we have companies that would like to set up recycling plants, high-value recycling, where we are able to actually convert, for instance, our plastic water bottles into new bottles. The cooking oil containers he talked about are already being converted. But without those incentives in place, we're not going to be able to scale and grow in this space as we desire. Don't forget again, the amount of money that we are spending on importing plastic resin is nearly $1 billion every year. And to add an additional tax to this, where we are not an oil-producing country, which means we must rely on importation of resin for our packaging. It is absolutely absurd in the context of removing ourselves from the competitiveness in the region, because all our products, we want to grow our export, be it agriculture, be it other value chains. We are not going to be able to do that with our packaging costs being high.
Okay.
Yes.
And sometimes, whenever you come up with a tax measure, you must always look at the ripple effects on other aspects of the economy. For example, I introduced the 25 plus 25% excise duty on vegetable oil. It's going to have a 70% increase on the price of materials, because the raw materials is what the manufacturers use. Last year, a lot of industrial use products were taxed heavily, the ones that Onjoy just mentioned. In the building sector, the steel billets, the craft papers, and all those things. Now, again, you're adding these other ones. Then on top of that, you are going to make the cost of finance very high. By the way, the cost of finance is a very significant component in any business, in any investment decision. What happened? The government came in when the cost of treasury bills, the borrowing was 8-9%, actually 7 or 8%. They ended up borrowing at 18%. They pushed the treasury bond and bill rates to 18%. Yeah. The banks followed suit. Today, the banking rates are almost 25%. So the cost of finance has gone up. It contributes to the cost of all these things. Then labor, as I mentioned. So I think it's very important that the government should remove any of these tax measures which would have significant impact on the cost of living, because today Kenyans are not those people whose reports were published by the economic survey report. No,
yeah, because they said
that is the elitist
GDP grew by
sectors 5%. Of the economy. The finance, financial sector, I think you mentioned, the financial sector and others, Benson mentioned. So those are the ones that grew. That's 6.5. But this is not what we are interested in. I think what Kenyans are interested in is that putting bread on the table. People are unemployed. People have minimum income. Inflation has already reduced the income to nominal. The nominal increase in salaries does not amount to anything. So I think let us remove some of those measures.
Yeah.
Clearly, which impact significantly on the cost of living. I think that's critical.
You have been on both ends of this. So as now private sector and also having been a legislator before, we are seeing a situation where there's almost like a representation quagmire. So when this comes to the floor of the House, how far can the amendments go? Are they going to prioritize the people's interests or party position?
You see, in the good old days, when government was government, manufacturing and all these sectors are the ones who would submit their proposals directly to Treasury. Treasury is the one that knows the impact of all this legislation. For example, the ripple effects of every single clause that they would come up with. So then the matter becomes very technical, and this, because Treasury uses KRA guys to look at all those aspects, and they look at the government's policy in terms of the growth, in terms of expansion of the competitiveness, or they look at so many things and say, yes, this one we should remove. But now that is not happening. You got a group of MPs go into a hall, they'll be asked to appear before them. They will say, this is what we want. The MPs will listen and say, thank you very much, we've heard you. And that's the end of the story. Tomorrow they will come with their own whatever. What happened last year? Over nearly 10,000 presentations were done across the country, both in writing and verbal and so many. But what happened at the end of the day? The government just went ahead with 90% of whatever they wanted. This is likely to happen again because it seems to me that the focus of the government is about getting taxed whichever way they can. I mean, the impact on the economy, the repercussions, the impact on investment. You're looking for investors outside there. But the investors are not dumb. They'll take a pen and pencil and they'll calculate and find out that it's not worth investing in this country because of the high level of tax. You go to the next country. Yeah. And I've given an example on this GDP, tax to GDP ratio. Yeah. The government wants a 22%. The largest country economy in Africa is Nigeria. Their tax to GDP ratio is 7%. You look at some of these countries around here, all of them around 11. Egypt, Ethiopia, one of the largest actually in Eastern Central Africa, is still less than 10%. It's only South Africa that is 25%. But again, how do you measure that? Yeah. It's a function of the denominator. So if you change the denominator, the GDP, for example, Uhuru rebased GDP by 30%. So before he did that rebasement of the GDP, the tax to GDP ratio was 19. Immediately expanded GDP by 30%. It came down to 14. So, I mean, there are so many ways of measuring these statistical things, but I think that should not be the focus. The focus is you are collecting the highest amount of revenue in Eastern Africa. All the other countries combined, you collect more revenue than them. Okay. And nowadays there are so many ways of if you go to, recently I was in Somalia, if you're doing an M-Pesa kind of transaction, it's free of charge. Any digital financial transaction, there is no tax on it, there's no charge on it, absolutely. But for businesses, it's going to be a cost because businesses are the ones who use banking transactions considerably. When you're borrowing, when you're making payments, when you're making transfers, when you're doing so many things, salaries, all those bank charges that you get in your business every day will now carry all those taxes which the government has introduced. So it'll make the cost of business expensive.
Even the best companies in the world do not return more than 10% return on investment. Kenya is borrowing consistently from the domestic market at 14, 15%. This is not sustainable. So we must also have a conversation with the private sector, especially the financial institutions, that yes, we dropped the interest rate control, but this is not the desired space. That will also require that government gets disciplined around the borrowing. Therefore, we must look at the expenditure side of our budget. We are looking at the revenue side, which is taxes away and employment also out of the country. Finally, is to look at what we do within the service sector. It's performed so well. We have had more tourists coming in our country, and therefore it speaks to an industry that is growing. We need to put more incentives in that space so that it can spur our economy to grow. But finally, the matters around increasing taxes, let's look at some of these proposals, including the motor vehicle tax that is going to ensure that people avoid taking comprehensive insurance cover because it's going to be very expensive. And that exposes the common man to possible areas of third party that when you get an accident, you won't get compensation. I think we need to relook some of these proposals.
Okay, let me check some of the feedback that's coming through and then I'll come to you for closing remarks really quick here in studio. Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. Let's bring that up on screen and see what you're saying before I take closing remarks from my guests here with me in studio on the Finance Bill 2024. They say that Kenya's Finance Bill 2024 has sparked widespread debate, particularly concerning its potential implication for banking and mobile payment. Private M-Pesa is financial transparency and what sacrificing personal privacy. Okay. All right. Let's see what else you're saying here. Babu Michael says, on the Finance Bill 2024, I have lots of questions, most so on this clause. They say that the bill grants KRA certain exemptions to data protection laws for tax assessment and collection purposes. Can this be some extent be used to punish others? Okay, my guest will respond to that. And let's see, Sir Nixon Duikide says, what is the most ideal way to call people for public participation on the finance bill? And where is the most ideal place to meet? Is it okay to mobilize people the same way it's done during general elections campaign period? Okay. MC Tonje says, my question, the tax percentage is being increased from 16 to 22%. Is Wanjiku being properly engaged in public participation and in a language that they understand? Was the 16% being collected properly, being managed? Okay. Godi Baraza says, in all manner of fairness, How does this government expect a Kenyan who's throwing last kicks because of the choking taxes to support its economic stabilization process? Isn't Kenya Kwanza administration smiling down at a dying person? Okay. Job, closing remarks now.
Thank you, Trevor. I'm looking at a number of issues. One is let's look at how we're going to support the standards of living for Kenyans and the cost of living for Kenyans to be reduced. The second one is how can we spur industrial growth by reducing the taxation on intermediate and raw materials. How can we spur also predictability of our taxation policies or fiscal policies? Because we have been seeing changes happening year in, year out. Where companies are unable to predict or to forward look as far as their expenditure and revenues are concerned. The other thing is how can we also ensure that we have ease of tax administration in the country. And the last one that I'm looking at, especially at this time of public participation, is that Finance Bill will not only drive revenues, but is going to spur export growth. It's going to spur SME development. It's going to ensure there is global competitiveness. We're going to have better tax base than what we have today. And most importantly, as I had said earlier, ensure that
it appeared to have a vision of the future that we all imagined, in terms of being able to develop value chains, in terms of being able to develop sectors right from the bottom. But in order to do this, we have to look at how is the common man being brought on board into this tax base that we so much want to bring them into. Unfortunately, with the current finance bill, it actually looks like it will be punishing them and pushing them out even beyond what they are able to afford. More importantly is the concern that even for the middle class, it looks like they are a threat. So beyond even manufacturing, as it were, we need to look at the principle of inclusivity. Okay. Yes.
Bilo?
Yeah, so just a couple of points.
Yeah.
One, I think this is a third world country. 80% of the people in this country live on subsistence economy, informal economy. Yeah? And when you say you want to raise the level of GDP tax to whatever, to 22%, and because you want to compare with, for example, the US, 27%, it's the richest country in the world. At 27%, they have an informal sector of less than 3%. Less than 3%. You are in a country where 80% of the people are just struggling to survive. They have no defined source of income. They're not on payroll. I mean, they're not. So you expect them to everybody must pay because some other country is doing that 22%. So I think that comparison should always be very carefully looked at. The second point I think I want to emphasize is that when you as a government, you're introducing these finance measures of taxes, you told Kenyans the reason is because you want to reduce debt. But in reality, what you see happening is that the debt is increasing. So when you're increasing debt, you're increasing taxes. There's no country that has prospered from debt and from high taxes. There's no country that can also attract investors when your level of taxes is so high. So I think government needs to really look at these things and cut down. And the solution to this thing is looking at expenditure. Yeah. Government cutting down expenditure. If they don't, we will be taxed to death, but this country will not go anywhere in terms of prosperity.
Hezbon?
Yeah, my final comments would be that, number one, we need to look at the 18th regime. I think the rollout has not been good. And if we can strengthen that space, have a staggered way of rolling it out, I think that would contribute massively towards tax efficiency. The other issue is about the fiscal policy. I think more efforts need to be geared towards addressing that space. In terms of supporting the manufacturing sector, I think we can do more in terms of incentives rather than more taxes. Expanding the tax base is very, very key. We have very few people paying taxes, while the rest, a majority of our Kenyans are not doing that. And then embracing technology, especially in some of the initiatives we had before, around rental income. I want to believe that there is a lot of untapped potential in rental income tax. that is not being brought to the surface because of the manner in which we are using. If we can embrace technology like we had tried in 2014, I think that would work best. And finally, is about corruption. People generally respond positively to initiatives by government if they also read good news about the government. When you realize or read the newspaper headline that e-citizen money is not properly accounted for over 10 years plus.
Park Pro, Job Wanjohi, Head of Policy Research and Advocacy at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, and FCPA Hesbon Omolo, ISPAC Council member. Thank you very much for making time for us this evening. We're taking a quick break. When we come back, it's time for some sporting action, and here's what's coming up.